Alright, today we're going to be cleaning a radiator on a Toro Dingo 525 that has the D902 engine in it. Customer has been complaining of overheating problems, so we're going to remove the radiator and clean it to see if that's the problem. First thing we're going to do is remove both the side screens here and on the other side. We're also going to remove these two nuts and bolts and the reservoir with the stand on it. We're going to remove these two bolts down here that hold the front grille on, and there's two bolts on the other side. And we're going to remove this bolt right here, and there should have been a bolt here too, so you're going to have to remove that on yours. And this hydraulic overflow over here, we're going to have to remove this cap so we can pull the front grille out. So now the radiator and oil cooler are exposed, so we're going to start taking off these lines. This is a hydraulic oil line. You got to take this off with an 1 1/8" wrench. Make sure to hold this back nut that connects to the hydraulic oil cooler. Hold that with an 1 16" wrench or you will damage your hydraulic oil cooler. So take this line off. Go ahead and take this coolant line off. The coolant will come out when you take it off, so be prepared. There are 3 bolts down here. You need to remove all 3 of these bolts. And then there's a plate that is down there that the bolts are holding on. Remove that and that plate. Coming over to the other side. Go ahead and remove these 2 coolant lines. Okay. And then again, you have another oil line down here. Let me get the flashlight. Same thing down here. Okay, when you remove this oil line, 1 1/8", you have to hold this piece of the hydraulic oil cooler with an 1 16" wrench to prevent damage from being done. Radiator is now out of the machine. We're going to open it up to clean it. There are 4 bolts, nuts, 2 here, or 1 here, 1 here, 2 on the other side. Up here, go ahead and take those off. And actually, before you do that, there's these spacers that are in there. You probably want to take a picture of your radiator, how these spacers are orientated with this shroud before you start taking it off, so you make sure you put the spacers back in the right place when you reassemble it. I'm going to go ahead and take the shroud off, and that exposes the hydraulic oil cooler and the radiator. And there's a lot of stuff that always gets caught in between this cavity, in between here and the radiator. So there are 2 bolts that hold the hydraulic oil cooler to the radiator. If you can see very well, there's 1 here, there's 1 here. So go ahead and loosen those 2. You don't have to fully take them off, but just loosen them. And go to the other side. There's 2 more bolts on the other side of the radiator. 1 there, 1 there. Go ahead and take those totally out, and you can lift them up and then slide the oil cooler off. Doesn't really want to cooperate, but as you can see, that's what gets stuck in there. So I just go ahead and clean everything off and use the air compressor to blow it out. Get it as clean as possible, and just try not to bend any of the fins. Alright, we went ahead and cleaned the radiator and the oil cooler. We put the oil cooler and radiator back together the way it was when it came off, and then installed the shroud on it. Went ahead and installed the radiator, shroud, and oil cooler back around the engine, around the fan. Behind here, this grill, you have to install, after you put the radiator back in, you have to install the 3 bolts and the piece of metal that holds the radiator in place. It's behind here, down there. Then you can come back over and start hooking up your lines. You have 1 line down here you have to hook up for your coolant. Up here, there's your hydraulic oil connection. Make sure to hold here, back here on the oil cooler with an 1 1/16" wrench when you tighten this up so you don't damage the hydraulic oil cooler. We went ahead and installed the reservoir back on the shroud for the outside front. We installed the outside front back on, and before you lock it down, you want to start this bolt, and then the 2 bolts on either side of the outside frame, and don't lock them down. Come in, install these 2 lines right here, right back on the radiator. Install that hydraulic oil line right there. Make sure to hold the hydraulic oil cooler with an 1 1/16". When you put this outside screen on, there is a cutout inside here that you can see. There's insulation up here, insulation down here, and then a cutout. You want to run this hose through the cutout and then up to the top, and then put your breather cap on. As far as the fan goes, which you might not be able to see very well, let me take it over to the other side. So now I have the fans sitting in the right place before you lock everything down. You want to see this gap right here where the fan edge meets the shroud. You want to have the same gap here as on the other side. Once you get that same gap there and the fan's not touching, then you go ahead and lock down these 2 bolts right here that hold the front grille, and then the 2 bolts up here that actually hold the radiator onto the front grille, and then you lock the radiator in place, and you've done it right. Then your fan's not going to be rubbing against the shroud. Done all that, hooked up all your lines. It's time to fill it with antifreeze, which is 50/50. And to do that, you're going to take off this cap right here. You're going to take off this 3/4 inch bolt that I've already taken out. And there's a vent over here, right there. You're going to go ahead and crack that vent. You don't have to fully take it off, just crack it. Okay? And then you're going to add coolant into here until the coolant starts to bleed out this vent right here. Once that happens, go ahead and close this vent. Add more coolant here till it comes out this hole right here. Once that happens, go ahead and put this 3/4 inch bolt back in, and add enough coolant back up here to get to the top, and then add coolant up to your oil cooler or oil reservoir up to this line right here. And after that, then you're done.